It's white to move. What would you play in this position? Hi, this is Adult Chess Improver. My name is Rich. You can find me at Adult Chess Trainer. And today we're going to be looking at this position here, coming up with some plans for white. We're going to go through and do some exercises that can help improve your chess. So those exercises are going to include looking at imbalances and going through a methodology for coming up with candidate moves, doing calculation and evaluation, and then arriving at the best move. This is actually a position that came up in one of my games recently. It was against a 1600, and I was in this position and trying to figure out how I can convert this to a win. What kind of plan should I make going forward, and how do I not blunder away what looks like a clear advantage for white? Okay, so thanks for joining me today. We're going to go through and kind of come up with how to answer the question, how do I think about this position? How do I come up with the right plan? How do I not overlook my opponent's resources and mess up and blunder something like the whole game or checkmate? Well, checkmate is the game, right? So, all right, where do we begin? That is a great question. So when you think about evaluating a position, you're looking at things like imbalances. Okay, well, what's an imbalance? Reassess Your Chess talks about this. There's some chess books that do a great job of discussing this, like Jeremy Silman, talking about imbalances in a position. So what's different about the position? Well, one thing we naturally tend to look at first would be something like material. And that's fine. We can look at material and we can assess what the imbalances are with the material. So if we just use the old-fashioned counting system of pawns are 1 and bishops and knights are 3 and rooks are 5 and queens are 9, we can quickly assess and see that white is up in exchange. That's a rook for a bishop, and also up 3 pawns. So going back here, we see a rook for a bishop, and then we have these 3 pawns here. So just doing the math there, we see that that is an advantage in material for white plus 5. Okay, so does that mean white's better? Well, not necessarily. Maybe, right? But we have to consider other things. So what are the other things that we should be considering? Well, one is king safety. Okay, so we notice that black's king may look safe. It's tucked away over here in the corner, but it is on this back rank, and we do have some open files that white is pressuring here, and at some point we can hit black with a check, and the king does have an escape square there. So just some things to consider when it comes to safety of the black king. What about our own king? How safe is our own king? Well, we do have these 2 pawns here which have moved up a little bit, and one of these pawns is being pressured, and we have the black rook looking down this file here. At any moment this file can open up. This pawn is actually pinned here and cannot take back, so this capture here by this pawn does seem like a serious threat. So I would say white has some things to think about in terms of king safety, and that might be actually one of the main things you should be thinking about from the white position is my king seems very vulnerable right now. So you want to be looking at your opponent's checks, right? Super important. And you could do this when you're looking at king safety, and that's fine when you're assessing the position. And as you're assessing it, you start to see moves, right? You start to see candidate moves both for you and your opponent. And that's sort of the point of doing these exercises is we're already seeing we have ideas in the air of this pawn capture. We even have ideas in the air of this pawn moving forward and creating a possibility of a checkmate there with the queen. And so more immediately, we have this check right here. So this looked pretty scary to me while I was playing the game. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to deal with black taking that pawn on f3. So yes, my ideas of checking here, well, doesn't really work with the rook right now because the queen is guarding that square. So then we start thinking about things like takes here and then move over, and then now that the queen is down here, and now do we have time to play this rook check up there? You see how this starts to work, and you start to come up with moves, candidate moves, plans, counterattacks, defense. This is sort of how you start to create these lines, and then you start to calculate them. Okay, all just by looking at this one imbalance of king safety, let's say. The material didn't necessarily lead us to moves, but things like king safety do. Also, piece activity. Okay, so next we'll look at, let's say, piece activity. Black's pieces, they may at first glance look passive, but they're actually much more active than what appears at first sight. So again, this queen is eyeing this pawn, also guarding this square. There's also ideas of this queen moving over here if this H file were to ever open up. And the queen is also attacking this pawn on B2. So a lot to keep in mind, but again, this helps with your visualization. If you can see all that, and even more immediately, the defense here, the attack here, which is a check, and then the attack on that pawn, those are things you do not want to lose sight of as you're going through your calculation. Okay, what else? This bishop. This bishop is X-raying all the way down to this H2 pawn here. And that can be relevant when we talk about a capture here, and then this pawn being pinned, and then this pawn taking this pawn, or this rook coming in. There's all sorts of tactical ideas here with this bishop along this diagonal. So not only is the bishop blockading the pawn, but it's being very aggressive here on this diagonal. It has a lot of potential energy, let's say, that we have to keep in mind. So, and then of course the rook is on this diagonal. So these three pieces are they're being a menace to white right now. So it makes it actually a little bit more difficult for white to execute a plan. And I think that's probably the main element which made this designing this plan, coming up with this plan so difficult, is black's pieces were more menacing than they might first appear to be. So how does white deal with some of these threats that might be coming from black, especially taking this pawn? Okay, so what about our piece activity? We're looking at, well, this queen's looking pretty good. We'd like to play a check there. The issue is, how do we follow up that check? So if the king moves over here, now black's rook is attacking our queen, and did we gain anything from that? So if we play it out, check, move, how do we follow it up? Maybe we follow it up with rook here. Well, no, this does not work. So why doesn't this work? Okay, let's see if we can come up with what a winning move from black would be. Okay, so remember, as great as this attack seems, because we're dominating this back rank here, black still has this check here. Okay, so playing this check here is now a big problem for white. So how does white deal with this? Well, we got to move the king over here. And now this pawn moves up. And how do we stop this mate? So that's the issue. Okay, so this takes into account the element of time. So you might have a great plan, which seems to work well, and if you can move 2 or 3 times in a row, it would be great. But that's not how chess works, right? We move, they move. If our move doesn't include check, our opponent always has the option of checking us back. So just some words of wisdom there that can help you. Okay, so what have we thought about so far? We've thought about piece activity, and these two pieces for white seem to be pretty active. We do have a potential threat of some checks here in the future, but they just don't work right now. What other piece do we have? Well, we have this rook in the corner. I think this is where I spent most of my time evaluating. How can I make this piece better, right? That's one of the plans you should be having, is take your worst piece and make it better. So what I really wanted to do in this position was move this rook over here to c1 so that I can make this plan work out. The one that we were just looking at. However, again, we don't have time to do this because we have this really nasty check right here that's coming from black. Okay, so before we commence with any attacking ideas, and I think this is really important, and I fall into this trap a lot, is I say, okay, I want my attack to work, here's my plans, and I keep going forward with these attacking plans, and then I overlook my opponent's resources, and there's, a lot of times my opponent will throw a check in, and that just throws all my plans off, and all the lines we just calculated are meaningless or for naught because your opponent's plan comes faster than yours, okay? And this is one of those cases. So if we were to move this rook over here, that evaluation, all our advantage is gone. It disintegrates just like that. So black is coming in with this attack, okay? And we can move over here, and all of a sudden, pushing this pawn forward here is an idea for black. Taking right here is an idea. And we're in trouble. Okay, there's all sorts of threats coming. This rook all the way to there, or taking this pawn. And so just not in time. Okay, so as much as we would love to play this rook over, we just don't have time to do it. So that is an element of time that's coming into play here. Okay, so we have to think more defensively. We have to deal with this check that's coming by black's queen, capturing on f3. How do we deal with that? So I think I spent a good majority of time just going back and forth between the different ways of trying to parry that attack. So, all right, what are some ideas? Well, one thing we can do is push this pawn forward. So if you haven't, go ahead and look at that and see, is that good? Try to evaluate, is that good? Is that bad? What is black going to do in response to that? So moving this pawn up to f4, one of the things I was worried about looking at the position was I was worried about black would play the queen over here and then would start eyeing this pawn over here, which would come with a check there. And overlooking something that kind of misses the point of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the black queen off of this diagonal here, because if we can drive the black queen off the diagonal, then we can proceed with this idea of rook to d8 check and swapping off rooks. So when we're doing our analysis, and I fell into this, I don't know how much time I spent worrying about this move when I shouldn't have worried about it at all, was black's real threat here was to, because remember, black's not obligated to move that queen, right? So we played a purely defensive move here by pushing this pawn up, just stopping the threat of queen taking f3 with check, but now black may have other plans. So remember what their other plans might include. This pawn here on the h file. Remember, there were ideas of that moving up or taking this pawn here, and black wants to open up this file. So actually the move we really should be fearing is the h captures g3, which is going to come with threats of this rook taking on h2. This queen can swing over here. There's all sorts of problems. The queen can go here and the pawn can move up there. So the queen can come in here. And we really need to worry about that. So going back here to our position, moving this pawn forward, it looks like it's going to, extinguish the threat that black had Oh, sorry, we can move over here and move up here. It got rid of black's threat of queen captures f3 check, but now we've run into other issues that we now need to worry about. So going back, are there any other moves we can consider that can help guard that pawn and maybe also help protect that pawn as well? Well, there is, and one of them is to think about putting the queen in a spot where it's let's say backing it up here to c3, where it's protecting that square and sort of blocking the line of sight to the b2 pawn by the queen. So that is the next move to consider. So let's take a look at that. So queen there. Now how does black respond to this? Well, notice if we do this, the queens are looking right at each other here. And so you might right away think about queen trades, right? So either black can initiate a queen trade. What does that look like? Takes here, and then everything looks good for white because now we've sort of eliminated the tension in the position and black's potential attacking energy with the queen. So we're up on material. We want to trade down, and that's going to favor us. So it's not going to be in black's best interest to trade those queens off. And then, if black doesn't get out of the way, then we can always initiate a queen trade there. And that's really what we're threatening. We're threatening to trade off these queens and then go ahead and, with our material advantage, fight against the inferior black position. So what else can black do in this position? So I did spend some time looking at this during the game and thinking about what black's response is going to be to this. Certainly black does not want to allow that queen trade. So see if you can come up with what a possible black response would be in this position. And again, we still have this idea here of taking the pawn. Okay, that should still be on your radar, opening up the position. And that does look scary, but remember, it does not come with check. Okay, so time is going to play a significant factor here in our evaluation. So does that mean we have time to do the queen trade if we take that pawn? Okay, so let's calculate it. So we take here, let's say like that. Can we still do the queen trade? Take there. And now, if black plays rook captures h2, do we have time to escape? We can go to g1. And now what is black's follow-up? Well, does black have any other checks in here? Any reasonable checks? So let's take a look. We have what? Not with the rook, right? The rook's not going to be defended by anything. But how about the bishop? Right, we do have this check right here. So then we have to look at that. And that looks annoying. Okay, so how does, can we get out of this? Is this creating a mating threat? So on and so forth. Let's see, what is white's best response to this? Wow. Okay, believe it or not, I'm checking the engine here. And it actually says queen to d4. Queen to d4 is the best. So like giving up your queen, right? Because we have enough material to trade down and win the game. So if we take here, I mean, that's a hard move to find, right? To just give up your queen, seemingly for nothing, but it's not for nothing. You have to keep the end goal in mind. We're a rook up here, and we should have enough to convert our win. This pawn does look scary, but remember we still have this pawn over here, which is about to queen, and there's not much black can do to stop that. So, difficult to calculate. Okay, this is why I spent a lot of time on this position. This is the type of position you can study for an hour, okay, and go through all the lines. And you know, it was not an easy decision to come up with this queen move here, the queen to c3, and we haven't even looked at all of black's responses yet. Okay, so just analyzing the h takes g3 line is quite complicated. But the one line I probably spent the most time, to be honest, was this bishop move right here. Okay, so this worried me as well. So black is still guarding the d8 square with the queen. The bishop is still guarding the b8 square from the pawn. And now black has just added an attacker onto the queen, making basically nullifying this queen trade. So throwing a wrench in our plans. So, okay, now we're back to the drawing board. Where do we go from here? How do we respond to this? So this is where you have to sort of start, you have to think outside the box a little bit and consider your checks, your captures. And one thing I was looking at was, well, what if I took the bishop, right? What if we take here and the queen takes there and then we promote there? Oh, well, then the queen is still guarding b8, which was really annoying. So, okay, what if we transpose the order there and we promote first? So we play here and then bishop takes back and then we do the queen trade. So we do lose a little bit of material, but remember, that's okay. We're up a lot of material. So this might be okay, as much as we like having this potential of this passed pawn becoming a queen at some point. We do have to realize sometimes we have to give up a little bit of material to sort of get an advantage back, or just to simplify. So, which is basically how I looked at this position here. So again, bishop goes there, and the idea was to go ahead and push this pawn forward and make a queen. So that's how the game sort of went from there, or that was the idea anyway. And in the actual game, I'll have to go back and see what was played here, but I felt comfortable enough playing the queen to c3 move, and I really was expecting this bishop move, and he ended up actually playing the better move over here, and then we simplified from there with the queen trade as we analyzed earlier. So realizing there was enough time to fend off this attack here. So this is, in my opinion, some really extensive calculation, and these are the skills you want to work at. You want to work out those lines, look at forcing moves, look at checks, look at your opponent's best responses when you're looking at these positions, and spend time on it. Spend time, make sure you can visualize the end position, try to evaluate it. This is what's going to make you better. And if you want to see more exercises like this, you want to train in this way, please consider subscribing to the channel. So we're putting out material all the time, and it is geared towards that beginner to intermediate level to go through the thought process, the mind of an amateur, and how to progress up. And these are the things that I've been working on to improve, and getting wins against 1,600 players for the first time ever. So using these skills. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider hitting the like button, and we'll see you next time.